Hi, I go by the name of Solus and welcome to my channel. In this video I'll be going in depth by reviewing a video game beloved by many, filled with nostalgia of all the childhoods it was present in, and all the memes it has resulted in recent years. You may know it from the PS1 Harry meme, you may know it because you're a fan of the series, or who knows. Maybe you know it because you simply have this game on a shelf somewhere in your granddad's house. And of course, I'm talking about Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone for the PlayStation 1. This game was released on the 16th of November 2001 and was developed by a company named Argonaut Games. They're also known for another game that goes by the name of Croc Legend of the Gobos. Although this company saw great success at the hands of these two games, they actually ended up being liquidated in 2004 and shut down officially in 2007. There are about 7 different versions of the game for most platforms that existed at the time, and these were PlayStation 1, Windows and Macintosh, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advanced, and later in 2003, GameCube, PlayStation 2, and Xbox. The remarkable thing about this is that all of these games were made by different developers and had completely different gameplays. They had some similarities on how the game was structured and how it was supposed to play out, but if you look at them all, you can clearly see that these are very different games. Before I get into the game, I just want to talk about how this video is going to be structured and the topics I'll be talking about. So essentially, this video will be split into 9 parts, and I'll be talking about the music, the controls, the different spells, the graphics, the plot, Quidditch, mini-games, collectibles, and at the end, my personal experience and thoughts about the game. So the first topic is the music. The soundtrack for this game was composed and produced by Jeremy Soule, and if you don't know him, I guarantee you that you have at least heard his work. He has worked on the soundtrack for games like Skyrim, Guild Wars 1 and 2, World of Warcraft, Mists of Pandaria, and honestly, the list goes on and on and on. This guy is an absolute legend, and he deserves all of the praise for all of the work he has contributed to the video game industry. I'll be completely honest, I have a huge amount of experience with this game. I've completed this game about 30 times, and I've had it since it was pretty much released 21 years ago, and I only noticed when I was about 10, which was like 6 years later than the game was released, that the soundtrack was not at all the same than those from the movies, which were composed by the legendary John Williams. Not necessarily because I was dumb and didn't clearly see that they are different from one another, but because they are both so magical and invoke everything that you might expect magic to feel and sound like in the Harry Potter universe. Just listen to the main theme for a moment. It's honestly really good. Some of the controls are taught by the NPCs, breaking the fourth wall, and others are taught by the blue books that function as guides. And also, the red books are the ones you use to save the game. Now the game controls are quite simple. You use analog sticks and the directional buttons to move, use X to use and cast spells, triangle to zoom and aim your spells, and this is only if you wish to, since most of the time, your spells just auto-locks to what it is that you need to cast them against. R1 to lock onto an enemy, R2 and L2 to move the camera around. These controls don't change much, but there are a lot of different mechanics in the game, so I will have to go through those one at a time. There are several different spells in this game. Technically you learn 4 spells at this school, but you actually know 5. The spells are Flipendo, the knockback jinx, think of it as Stupefy, Wingardium Leviosa, Incendio, Verdimillious, and Aviforce. Let's talk about Flipendo first. The Flipendo spell is the first spell you learn. Of all the people that could teach you this spell, it is Nearly Headless Nick, the Gryffindor house ghost, that teaches you the spell. This makes absolutely no sense, but in all honesty, of all the crazy things this game does, this is definitely one of the most tame. You use the spell to cast it against enemies, damage, and defeat them, and in some cases you also use it to move objects in order to make a new path available for platforming. Now from now on, all of the spells or skills you obtain, you do so in class. The classes are divided into 2 sections. Once you get into the classes, you have to repeat the pattern you see on the screen by following the white circle at the center of the screen and tapping on the corresponding button on your controller. It's essentially a rhythm game, and as you're about to see, this game absolutely loves rhythm sections and time trials. The second section is an example of how to use the spell. First you get an example from your teacher, and then you get to repeat it yourself. Think of it as a practical test. In the beginning of the game, you get to learn Wingardium Leviosa in Charms class. This is the levitation spell. The way you can tell which spell you're casting is determined by the color of the sparkle on top of the object you cast it on. This one happens to be yellow. Once you're done with the rhythm section, you cast it on an hourglass and levitate it onto the top of a ledge, and that's how class finishes. Incendio is the spell displayed by the color green. As the word implies, this is the fire casting spell. You don't exactly throw fire, but more set things on fire. You learn this in your herbology lesson. And why is Professor Sprout teaching you how to burn plants? Don't ask me, man. The morality in this game is really muddled. To successfully cast the spell, you need to tap on the button you see rotating on the screen as it gets faster until you do this 5 times and set whatever it is that you're setting on fire. Now Verdimillious is the one displayed by the color blue. This spell is actually really interesting and cool. Use it when you see ghostly platforms, and once it's casted, they turn into actual floating concrete that facilitate your access to previous inaccessible areas. You get to learn this from Professor Quirrell in Defense Against the Dark Arts class. Last but not least, you have Aviforce. This one is displayed by the color orange. Aviforce is a transfiguration spell, which, you can probably guess, is learned in Transfiguration class with McGonagall. The spell is cast similarly to that of the Incendio, but you only press one button as it rotates. Yep, that's it, one button. They actually started cutting corners at the end of the game, just bear with me. When cast successfully, it turns eagle statues into little birds that occupied floating tables that, when free, you can use to access certain areas of the game. Now the graphics. This is probably the most fun topic to talk about regarding this game, and one of the ones I wanted to talk about the most. When relating to the environment, I actually don't think it's that bad. I actually think it's quite charming, beautiful, and it encapsulates the feeling of a castle pretty well. Both when illustrating a feeling of comfort and safety, and when it's displaying a feeling of emptiness and how spooky it can be. The characters, on the other hand... Yeah, that's all I have to say about that one. Now that we start talking about the plot, this is when I feel like the issues start becoming apparent with the game. If you think of this game as a standalone product, it just really doesn't work. For example, imagine the Harry Potter movies and books did not exist in order to give you any context for the story of the game. It just leaves this game with so many plot holes that it actually makes it look like the Swiss cheese of video games. When you start the game, you're introduced to the story by this flipbook illustration cinematic that gives you the most information it can in what it feels like 2 minutes. Now, look at how you meet Ron.
Hey Harry, remember me, Ron Weasley? That slimy Slytherin Draco Malfoy ran through this door with an owl under his arm. I think it was your owl Hedwig. Let's go after him.
He's not mentioned at all in the introduction of the game, and all of a sudden you meet Ron and he introduces himself to you as if you had met before. Also, you can tell your relationship to certain characters just by the way they treat you, and not because you have developed any sort of narrative with them in any way. Draco is introduced to you because he stole your owl and trapped it, and you also know he's a dick because he mentions your dead mom in the first 3 minutes of the game. Why does he do this? Because f*** you, that's why.
Go home to your mother, Potter. Oh, sorry, you don't have one, do you?
Now, you have to keep in mind, Hagrid in this game is a special case. A lost cause, you could say. Of all the relationships that you have in the game, my favorite is this one because of how seriously bad, and through the eyes of an adult, how neglecting it is. So this dude is the gamekeeper at Hogwarts, and throughout the game he just keeps asking an 11-year-old orphan kid for favors that just endanger either his life or his financial stability. The first quest he gives you is to get some fire seeds from the castle grounds in order to help his dragon hatch. Why can't he do this himself, you ask? No fucking clue. He just asks you for a favor, and as a good obedient little kid, you do so with no personal gain whatsoever. You jump over lava, you flipendo enemies on the way, and then you have to make your way back. Once you get back, he gives you the book Quidditch Through the Ages. Norbert is born, and that's one of the 2 times you see Norbert in the game. Another one of the funniest and honestly worrying sections you interact with Hagrid is when he asks you for help once again because Norbert is sick and he needs some form of concoction to cure him. You head to Diagon Alley in the middle of the school year with him. He then asks you to cash out your own money from Gringotts to then purchase the products he needs from the Magical Menagerie, Ollivanders, and the Owlery. All of this while he's getting pissed on butterbeer at the Three Broomsticks pub.
I'm off to the Leaky Cauldron for a few butterbeers if you need me. I'll meet you when you're all done.
This dude legit left you to buy him things while he's off getting drunk. There are some clear safeguarding issues at this school, man. Just for the sake of another example, the first time you meet McGonagall is when you have an altercation with Malfoy over Neville's Remembrall. You bash the shit out of Malfoy's broom in a broom-chasing action section you had prior to meeting McGonagall and got Neville's Remember back. Once Neville leaves, McGonagall approaches you and scolds you mildly on your behavior, but then proceeds to praise your broomstick skills. Then she says she'd like you to become Gryffindor Seeker and informs you that the first match is about to begin and you have to go and play it. Not soon, but then and there. Just to give you an example of what your first day at Hogwarts looks like in this game, you have to attend 6 classes, you learn all your spells, you learn how to make a potion, you learn how to fly on your broomstick, you have your first Quidditch match, you are attacked by Voldemort twice, and manage to avoid a number of life-threatening situations before and after the fact. There's just no momentum building, it just throws everything at you. It's absolutely crazy. At least the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and GameCube games were split into 7 days in which every night you had to do something different, while during the day you were supposed to be attending classes. Which, come to think of it, doesn't leave much time for sleeping now, does it? But it's expected that any game has shortcomings, especially ones released 2 decades ago. Quidditch, in my opinion, is actually quite fun, although I understand the criticism it gets. When it comes to the controls, you press X to accelerate and then use the directional buttons in order to direct where you want to fly. You first learn to fly at the beginning of the game, when you attend a flying lesson with Madame Hooch. You fly around a courtyard 3 times, increasing in difficulty each time, while going through several hoops, and once you either run out of time or collect all the hoops, you are awarded house points depending on how well you have performed. If there's anything I'm surprised when it comes to the Quidditch matches, is that the stadium is quite well designed. You get to fly quite freely, if you want to lose, which makes me think that, despite all of this game's shortcomings, it was quite ambitious and it has to be somewhat admired and given credit for that. Now when it comes to the actual difficulty of the matches, there is virtually no difficulty to these. You chase the snitch around for a while flying through the hoops, then the opposite team's Seeker gets introduced and competes with you for the snitch. This Seeker honestly doesn't add any difficulty to this section. He literally just bumps into you every once in a while, but you end up overtaking him and he isn't even in the frame anymore. You then get close to the snitch and a bar with the illustration of your hand and the snitch shows up. When the snitch illustration slides close enough to your hand, you press X and boom, you win the game. This is legitimately the only form of scoring. If you look closely in the background, no other players are actually playing Quidditch. They're just flying around as to present as if they were actually playing. Throughout the game, you have several minigames that you can optionally participate in. You can find these by accessing small bookcases or sections of the wall, which obviously have different textures. They are usually presented by Nearly Headless Nick, and they reward you with famous witches and wizards cards. In the grounds, you have ones where you have to collect pink Buddy Bot's beans while dodging moving objects before the time runs out. In the dungeons, you have another one where you have to use the Flipendo spell to knock cauldrons into the correct places. This is also done before the time runs out. Again. This game absolutely loves time trials. Other minigames are part of the actual narrative of the story. For example, in the part I mentioned previously where you had to Gringotts to collect some money, you actually have to play this part. You collect 1 Knut, 1 Sickle, and 1 Galleon by going on a cart ride through the Gringotts Goblin Tunnels and collect these for yourself. If you do these perfectly, you also get rewarded with 3 famous witches and wizards cards, if you have the patience. Now we get to the collectibles. There are several types of collectibles in the game. The twins, Fred and George, show up in different parts of the game and present you with different colored Buddy Bots every flavor beans that they are interested in. Once you collect enough of these, you get the password for a portrait, and then you collect your reward. There are 4 types of beans. There's yellow, purple, green, and red. Once you collect all of these, you get the following items. You get a glove for Quidditch that resists bludger hits, a Nimbus 2001 broomstick, a famous Witches and Wizards card, and a stronger version of Flipendo called Knockback Jinx Duo. In retrospect, it obviously sounds like I'm quite critical about the game, and as if I thought that it's a bad game. And the truth is that, well, it is a bad game. But it's a good bad game. To me, the issues only started becoming obvious when I started looking at this game in a critical sense, and not as a Harry Potter fan. Because as a Harry Potter fan, my mind filled in all the gaps, there were no plot holes. The game was quite similar to the books, and the story was there. But when all of that is put aside, you start understanding that the game was tailored and sold to fans of the Harry Potter franchise, not people that simply wanted a random video game that they thought looked cool on a shelf in a video game shop. So objectively, the issues with the game are the fact that it contains too many plot holes. Everything happens quite fast and it's not adequately paced at all, which is understandable considering that I finished the game in 3 hours and a half. Also, it has too many mechanics. New forms of gameplay are introduced all the time, but the further you get into the game, the lazier they seem to get. You see these with the spells, with the flute playing bit when you have to get past Fluffy, as well as when you realize that at no point you combine these mechanics at all, and if you ever did, it was so unremarkable that it's hard to remember when this happened. With this being said, I love this game. I've played it since I was 5 on my original PlayStation, and it's one of the default games I return to when I'm having a particular tough time in my life. It's always been there as a comfort and as a safe space for me to return at any point. It's been a home and I love it, with all its flaws, shortcomings, from the shitty graphics, the terrible voice acting, the beautiful music, and Hagrid's face. I love it all. This wasn't the first time I've played this game, and surely won't be the last. I'll be returning to this shaky and crumbling mess of a game for many years to come. And with that being said, I rate this game 5 PS1 Hagrids out of 10, because it's so bad, it's good.